Today, we're going to take a look at several techniques for creating car paint shaders. Let's go. All right, so we're going to be looking at car paint shaders today, and we're going to start out in Unity, and then we'll switch over to Unreal, and I'll show you how to do the same things in that engine as well. So the first technique that we're going to look at today is how to create the color for a car paint shader. So let's take a look at our first shader here. So for the color of our car paint shader, we're actually using a gradient. And this is a really convenient feature of Unity, is the ability to create not just a solid color. So if I want to, I can add a color to my scene, but I can also add a gradient asset, which is a color ramp or a combination of colors all blended together. So here you can see I'm using this light blue color, and then on the other end of the gradient, I'm using a dark blue color. And then I blend this gradient using a Fresnel effect node. So Fresnel, what it does is it uses the angle of the surface toward the camera. So if the camera is looking right at the surface, I get a dark color. And if the surface is perpendicular to the camera, then I get a light color. And I can control the fall off using this power value here. So if I give it a power of 1, you can see the black space in the middle is larger and the fall off is sharper. Normally Fresnel effects tend to be around a value of 3. But in this case, for my car paint, I'm using a value of 0.2. And what that does is it gives me a much larger amount of this darker blue color. So as the angle to the camera falls off, I'm sampling this light color for the gradient as it's pointing straight at the camera, and then around at glancing angles, I'm using this darker color. So the way that I come up with these colors is I pick a color for the light one, and then I pick another color for the dark one that is both darker and more saturated than the lighter color. And that gives me a good color combination. And then I use the sample gradient node. I pass in my gradient and my Fresnel effect to get this final look for my car paint. Now, some cars are really fancy and they have this chameleon paint, which kind of changes color based on the angle. And you can do that as well using a gradient. So here you can see I've got a gradient that changes from green to purple. So if I wire this in instead, now you can see I'm getting that nice chameleon paint effect here. And if I save my shader and switch back to my scene, yeah, now you can see that I've got this paint that changes color depending on the angle toward the camera. So that's how you do a chameleon effect on the paint if that's what you wanted. But most normal car paint just uses one color, and then it goes from a bright to a darker, more saturated version of that color. All right, the next interesting thing about car paint is that it has little flecks of metallic material in it that make it create sparkles like this. So let's take a look at how we can create these sparkles. In Unity, it's pretty easy because we have this nice Voronoi node here that creates procedural noise. And so what I can do here is, let me just change this to a value of like 20, for example. Now, what you're going to see here is this preview is showing us the base Voronoi pattern, but what we actually want is the cells. So let me show you. So the base pattern, if I add a preview node here, the base pattern looks like this, but the cells themselves look like this. What this node is doing is it's giving me these randomly shaped polygons, and then it's filling each of them in with a random value. And this is what I can use to create the metallic flakes that are embedded in the paint. And so what I've done is I've just set my cell density here to some value that's really, really high, so that I get lots and lots of these flakes that are just tiny. And then I pass that into my smoothness, so that it controls the smoothness of the shader. So every flake in this tiny pattern here gives a slightly different smoothness value, and that's what creates the sparkles. Yeah, so you can see if I change the size of these, we get a really fine, sparkly pattern, and it creates a really nice car paint effect. And the real advantage of using this Voronoi node is that because this pattern is procedurally generated, it never tiles. And so I never get any sort of repeating pattern at all in my car paint sparkles. Okay, the next effect that I want to talk about is called clear coat. And this is a really interesting effect. Basically what it is I have the surface of my car, but then on top of the surface, there's like this extra layer of wax or polish. And the waxy layer is really shiny, but then the paint layer underneath it has a different specular value. So the wax is really shiny and the paint itself is less shiny. So let me show you how that works. So to use the clear coat feature, what I need to do is come in here to the graph inspector under my material properties and surface options and come down here to the bottom, and there's this checkbox called clear coat. Now I want you to notice if I turn this off, there's this clear coat mask element down here that gets disabled. But when I turn it on, it adds this clear coat mask element into my master stack. And what that allows me to do is to add that additional layer on top. So if I set my clear coat mask to 0 and I save the shader, I hope you can see this in the preview. There's an extra layer of smoothness on top. So let me turn it back on. I'll set it to 1 again. Yeah, so this extra layer of wax on top is extremely shiny and polished. It's got a very high smoothness value. But then I have this other smoothness value, which is the smoothness of the paint underneath. So let's just delete this connection here for a value for a minute. And I'll set my smoothness to 0 and I'll set my coat mask to 1. All right, so now you can see, even though I have my smoothness set to 0, my surface still looks extremely smooth, and that's because it's got this extra layer on it, which is the clear coat. So if I turn my clear coat mask to 0, now you can see I'm getting that smoothness. It's basically like turning that clear coat off. However, it's important to know that if you have this clear coat box checked and you set clear coat mask to 0, you're still paying the price for clear coat. So don't just turn this on and then set this to 0, because that's kind of a waste. So if you're going to turn on clear coat, make sure that you're actually using it. So just setting it to 0 is not getting rid of the cost of clear coat. So we've got this extra layer here, which is like wax or something that you're putting on that's extremely shiny. And that gives you separate control over the base smoothness and the clear coat smoothness. So now if I wire my Voronoi pattern into my base smoothness here, you can see that I'm getting the nice sparkles that I was getting before, and I'm also getting that extra waxy coating, the smoothness on top of it. You can see that I've adjusted it a little bit. Instead of just wiring my Voronoi directly in, where I'm getting like extra sparkliness, I've wired it into this lerp node here, and I'm able to change the range of the sparkles. You can see that I've limited them between 0.3 and 0.8, so that my smoothness from the sparkles, or my base smoothness, never gets too high, and that allows the coat mask to really shine through. So if we take a look at our scene here, you can see that I've got that clear coat layer on, and then I've got the sparkles underneath it, and it gives like a really realistic looking car paint effect with that wax layer on the top that's really smooth and shiny, and then the sparkles underneath it. So a really nice effect there. The last thing that I want to show you is how to create carbon fiber, because some really fancy cars use this carbon fiber material. And so that's the next thing that I'm going to show you how to create. So here's our carbon fiber shader, and this effect is really interesting because we're using a normal map, but it's not being passed into the normal socket. You can see here in our shader that our normal socket is empty. And the carbon fiber is being used just for the base color. So let's take a look at how this effect works. Let me just break this apart a little bit so you can see the normal map. Here's the texture that we're using for the carbon fiber. And if we take a look at that texture over here, you can see it has this nice pattern that gives the shape of the weaved fibers that are connected together. And so I've got my normal map. And what I want to do with it, first of all, is I want to tile it a whole bunch of times. So I've got my multiply value here set to 15. So I've got my UV coordinates, multiplying them by 15, and then I pass them into this carbon fiber texture so that you can see I'm tiling this pattern over and over again to give me that carbon fiber effect. And then instead of plugging it into the normal, actually, you know what? Let's disconnect this. So we're not using this as color for now. I'm just going to move this part out of the way. And what I want to do now is connect this normal to the normal input, just to show you why I'm not doing that. So when we connect our carbon fiber normal up to the normal input of the master stack, if I switch back here to my scene, what you can see is that instead of looking nice and smooth like a car should, it's using the normal for the surface of the car instead. And what I want to do is create an effect where I've got a nice polish layer on top and the carbon fiber is underneath, and I'm just looking at it through that nice shiny polish layer. So the way that I do that is I sample my normal here, and then I'm going to transform it from tangent space into world space. So I've got my transform node set from tangent to world, and I've got it set as a normal. And then I pass that into my Fresnel effect. And just like we talked about before with the color, the Fresnel effect is going to give us a nice fall off where in the middle it's dark and on the edges it's white. But actually, I want the inverse of that. And so I'm using the 1- node to invert my Fresnel effect. So I'm getting dark on the edges and light in the middle. And you can see that the normal map is creating some really nice shape here in combination with my Fresnel effect node. Okay, then I want to remap it a little bit. So I'm passing it into a lerp, and I'm blending between 0.1 and 0.6. And this kind of darkens the effect down, so it's not getting too bright. Then I've got another Fresnel effect node, and I've just raised that to a power of 0.2. And the purpose of this, so you can see it's dark here in the middle and bright on the edges, but then I'm passing it through a 1- again. And so the purpose of this is to darken the whole effect on the edges and keep it regular or normal in the middle there. So I've got my Fresnel effect, pass it into 1-, and then I multiply that by my previous effect, and the result is a carbon fiber pattern that's dark on the edges and brighter in the middle. So now I can pass this into my base color, and I want to disconnect this normal here from the normal socket, and I'm going to move these nodes back down into place. Just put it like that. And so now you can see I'm using that carbon fiber for the pattern that's happening underneath, but then I'm using the clear coat mask to make this surface nice and shiny. And I'm also passing my Voronoi noise in, just like I did before, into the smoothness. So I've got a smooth, waxy coating with the sparkles. And then I've also, underneath that, I've also got this nice carbon fiber pattern. So if we switch back to our scene and we kind of move around here, you can see the sparkle layer here and the clear coat layer, which is nice and shiny. And then underneath it all, we have the nice carbon fiber pattern going on as well. So these are all techniques that you can mix and match for car paint options because there are a lot of different types of car paint. And each of these will help your car paint look more realistic. All right, let's switch over to Unreal and take a look at these same techniques over there. All right, here we are in Unreal, and we're going to take a look at the same techniques. So here is our car paint color shader, and you can see I'm using a Fresnel node here. I've set my Fresnel exponent to 0.2, and if we just wire this directly in, you can see that I've got that nice fall off where we're going from a dark color in the middle to a light color on the edges. And we can use this to blend between our light color of paint and our darker color of paint. Now, Unreal doesn't have the nice gradient that Unity does. And so what we can do to create a gradient instead is just create two colors and lerp between them using the lerp node here. So we pass the result of our Fresnel into our lerp, and then we pass that into our base color. And you can see that we're blending between our nice light blue color and our dark blue color on the edges. Now, just like we did in Unity, we can also create a chameleon paint in Unreal the same way. So here I've got my green color and my purple color, and I can use the same Fresnel node to blend between those two colors and pass that into my base color. Now you can see I've got that chameleon paint effect where my car is kind of purple at glancing angles and green in the center. And of course you can use whatever colors you like for these. I've seen all kinds of different chameleon paint patterns. But let's just, for now, let's just stick with our standard car paint with a light blue looking right at the camera and kind of a darker blue around the edges. You can see that we've also set our roughness to 0.3 here. And we can obviously, if we want a more polished car, we can change our roughness to something like 0. Now we've got a really shiny car paint. All right, let's move on to take a look at how we can create the sparkles in our car paint. So here's our car paint sparkle shader. You can see that for the color, we're doing the exact same thing that we did in our previous shader here. We've got our light blue color and our dark blue color blended using our Fresnel node. Now, just to up our game a little bit, we've set our metallic to 0.5. If I set this to 0, you can see that it's looking more plasticky, but if I set it to 0.5, now it's looking a little bit more metallic. And I'm not going to go all the way metallic because our car paint is not made out of metal, but I do want just a little bit of metalness in there. And so I'm just going to give it a value of 0.5. In Unity, we used our Voronoi node to create a procedural noise for the sparkles, but we can't do that in Unreal because Unreal doesn't have that same value. And so what I've done instead is I created a Voronoi texture like this, and we're just using a texture sample to get those values instead. So I can just sample this texture, and I take my texture coordinates and multiply them by 30 first of all, just to tile that texture really tightly. And then to adjust the value, I raise it to a power of 4, and that just makes my sparkles a little bit shinier. Then I pass that into my roughness, and you can see that we've got some nice sparkles on the surface of our car paint. So pretty cool. We're using texture sample instead of procedural noise, but that's okay. We get the same result here in Unreal as we got in Unity. Pretty cool. Okay, the next thing that I want to show you is the clear coat feature in Unreal. So in Unreal, if I select my root node here, I can set my shading model to clear coat. And when I do that, I get a couple of new values added to my root node here. I get a clear coat input and a clear coat roughness. And so if I set my clear coat value here to 0, it's going to turn off that extra shading layer. And if I turn it back on, now it looks like my surface is covered with like a layer of extra shiny wax that makes it look really nice. So I can set my clear coat value to 1, and I can set my clear coat roughness to 0 to control exactly how shiny it is. Now the roughness underneath the clear coat is still being controlled by my sparkles. So here I'm sampling my Voronoi texture, multiplying my texture coordinates by 30 to tile it really tight. But then you can see I'm remapping those values by wiring it into a lerp node, and we're blending between 0.7 and 0.2, and that's the underlying roughness. So if I turn my clear coat off, you can see that I've got the sparkles, but they're not really shiny. My object is just kind of partially shiny. But if I turn the clear coat on, now it's coated with that extra smooth polish layer. All right, so that is the clear coat feature in Unreal. Now let's take a look at the carbon fiber. So here you can see that I'm doing the carbon fiber the same way that I did in Unity. I've got my texture coordinates here, and I'm multiplying them by 30 and 15 so that they tile nicely on my object. Then I sample my texture, and then I transform the texture from tangent space to world space before passing it into the normal socket on my Fresnel node. Then I'm raising my Fresnel to an exponent of 0.7, and I'm inverting it, and then I'm remapping those values. So I'm blending between 0.033 and 0.11. This is just so that my the value coming out of my Fresnel is not too bright. And then I do another Fresnel raised to an exponent of 0.2, and then I invert that, multiply them together, and pass that into the base color. So for the base color, you can see that I'm getting a value like this. And the way that I'm getting this is with the Fresnel using the normal of the carbon fiber texture there. So again, I'm not passing the normal into the normal socket because we want the surface of our object to be nice and smooth. But I am using it with our Fresnel node to create a base color that looks like this. And then on top of that, we're adding the clear coat value, which makes it look nice and shiny. And then underneath the shine, we have that cool carbon fiber pattern. You can also see that I've set the base roughness to 0.1, and I've got my, so right now I'm actually using this feature without clear coat, which is a really efficient way of doing it. So you can see I've got my clear coat set to 0, and I could even come here and turn off clear coat completely, just set this to default lit, and I'd still get the same result because my roughness here is 0.1. But there is one more thing that I want to show you with clear coat. So I'm going to come and set this back to shading model clear coat. And then I'm going to set my clear coat value to 1. And I'm going to turn my roughness value down to something like 0.7. And now I'm going to use a really advanced technique in Unreal that comes with the clear coat feature. The first thing that I need to do before I do this is that I need to come over here to project settings. And if I just type in clear coat here, you can see that I've got this setting here called clear coat enable second normal. And I've got this checked. When you turn this on, you have to restart Unreal, and it takes a little while to recompile all the shaders. But once you have this on, it enables you to use this other value down here called clear coat bottom normal. And you can see that I have a normal here, but I also have a normal here. So this normal here is the normal value that's underneath the waxy surface. And this normal here is the waxy surface. So instead of doing all of this to create my carbon fiber effect, what I can do now is take this normal here and wire it into my clear coat bottom normal. So now, actually, let me get rid of this wire here. And so now what we're doing is we have this normal map going into our bottom normal, and we've got no normal map going into our top normal. So this normal here is the surface of the wax, and it's completely smooth. But then this normal here is the normal for the carbon fiber that's underneath or inside the wax. And that gives us the most realistic effect that you can achieve doing this. So, you know, we have our nice waxy surface, and then we have our carbon fiber underneath it. And so this roughness value is for the carbon fiber underneath. You know, I can make it completely rough if I wanted to. But you can see that it still has that layer on top that is beautifully smooth because I have my clear coat set to 1 here. I might want to give my carbon fiber just a little bit less roughness, so it has a little bit of shape to it. You can see how this clear coat bottom normal allows me to create this really realistic looking carbon fiber that's inside this other layer. So pretty cool, but I will say that this is a really expensive feature that will add significant demand to your resources, so you definitely don't want to use this on mobile platforms, for example, or with weaker GPUs. In that case, you can use this other technique. Let me just switch it back here, where we're not using clear coat. We can just set this to default lit. Then we set our roughness to 0.1. And now we have a similar look. It's not quite as real looking, but it's a pretty good approximation. All right, I hope you enjoyed today's tutorials and that you learned a little bit of something about car paint. It's really fun to play around with these, and I hope you had just as much fun working through it as I did. All right, everybody, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.